topics. So we'll dive into all of that. And if we could, I'd love to, since I don't have a chance to know you, I'd love to hear, if we could very quickly go around the room. I'd love to know very briefly what your niche of marketing you're really excited about, what you hope to do post grad. What are you looking to? So if we could, I'd love to learn more, because I'll kind of try and tailor my conversation today.
So we'll start on the back row, and then we'll start over here and go around, and then we'll go to you all. All right, go ahead.
I'm Megan, and I'm really interested in either healthcare or anything in the food and nutrition industry. Marketing for them, I'm not really sure yet.
I'm Holman, and I like sports marketing, looking at different how organizations or teams can market themselves and reach more fans, things like that.
I'm Grant. I'm interested in seeing how marketing drives certain types of businesses in different industries, and I want to get into consulting.
I'm Adriana. I am most interested in public relations and communications type of intersection with marketing. Not really sure what industry, but right now I'm in transportation, so TBD.
I'm Annabelle. I'm interested in brand management for the beauty industry, or data analytics for pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, my name is Anthony Okolwe. So I am second year MBA. So I already have a place I'm going after graduation. I'll be working with Ecolab. So and then my team is like a digital global platform team that supports businesses in power industry, refineries, mining, and sort of broad categories of those industries. So my aim is to get as much information as possible, to learn as much as possible in B2B marketing and marketing generally. So I think that would be a fun.
Thank you.
I'm Alice. I want to be a marketing manager for any kind of animal nonprofit, like a wildlife sanctuary or animal shelter.
I'm Nicole. I want to work in the music industry, either in artist management or tour marketing.
I'm Julia, and I'm interested in event management.
I'm Iman, and I'm interested in the advertising and branding side of community.
I'm Mimi, and I'm interested in sports marketing.
I'm Melissa, and I'm interested in CPG, sweets and snacks industry.
I'm Haley, and I'm interested in sports marketing, specifically looking at branding and partnerships.
I'm Adele. I'm interested in sports or entertainment marketing.
I'm Eleanor. I'm really interested in data analytics, and I like fashion.
I'm Haley, and I'm interested in anything that intersects creativity with marketing and specifically consumer product goods.
I'm Gracie. I'm into digital and entertainment marketing as well as brand management.
I'm Ian, and I'm into digital marketing.
I'm Ria, and I'm interested in brand management for CPG and beauty companies.
I'm Catherine, and I'm interested in digital marketing for music.
I'm Ashlyn, and I want to work in marketing ops in a CPG company.
I'm Abigail, and I'm interested in brand management for a beauty company.
I'm Cece. I'm interested in the CPG industry and more particularly the consumer behavior sectors.
I'm Ariel, and I'm also interested in the overall marketing strategy or internal strategy.
I'm Sean. I'm interested in the data analytics part of marketing in general.
Hi, Meto, interested in corporate strategy and in technology, any tech company.
I'm Jesse. I'm interested in sports marketing mainly.
I'm Sam. I'm interested in business strategy, specifically process optimization and report prep.
I'm Matthew. I'm interested in brand management as well as agency work.
I'm Elena. I'm interested in marketing strategy or new product development in the wellness space.
I'm CJ. I'm interested in the entertainment and sports industry.
I'm Courtney. I am interested in brand management and specifically retailing for CPG industry.
I'm Olivia. I'm interested in client management or account management in the advertising industry, as well as entrepreneurship
real estate industry.
Hi, I'm Liam. I'm interested in the kind of like educational marketing industry, so kind of college admissions, and kind of both from out of high school and kind of looking at college as well.
Cool, awesome. And that wraps us up.
All right, thank you, Dr. Riley. First off, great to hear all of your unique stories and where you're going. Obviously, wishing you the best in your future careers and where you're headed. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to share a little bit about myself. Before we get started, I wanted to start today with, of course, a little cartoon.
Hold on 1 second, Ryan. You guys can raise your hand and ask questions throughout. You don't have to wait.
Yes, please do. Yeah, and it's hard sometimes for me to see your hand, so I'll try and stop it if Dr. Riley, if you can let me know.
Yep.
Interrupt me anytime if you guys want to dive into a topic. That's what I'm here for, to help you. So yeah, definitely make it as conversational as we can. So we've got an exercise a little bit later that we're going to go through. You guys have choice. This is for better or worse, this is my life every day, is these kinds of acronyms and things. And if you don't know what these terms mean, we're going to help give you some skills and knowledge today to talk about this. But this is ultimately the kind of put in front of the marketing and digital marketing trends. This is oftentimes the conversations that we have. Sound ridiculous. That's reality. So very briefly about me. So I was raised in South Florida, but I'm not a Florida man. I left before that whole thing came to be. I live in Atlanta with my amazing wife, and started the web coding by hand long ago. But I've had the opportunity and the privilege really of leading both small and large teams in very large and small companies for global B2B web platforms and systems. And it's really something I love coming to work every day and being a part of. What I love most about that, though, is getting to know the stakeholders and the people within our markets and how they want to go to market locally. So I love getting to learn the culture, getting the uniqueness, what their needs are, because it often differs. It's not one strategy for all. So that's what I really enjoy, is just being able to always have a unique challenge that's just slightly different and trying to see what's best for them. I joined Deloitte about 1.5 years ago, and I absolutely love it. It is amazing, all of those things. I can say I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, but it's fantastic. I work within an internal team, so my focus is to market a portion of our consulting business called Deloitte Digital. It's a creative and consulting practice. So we do a lot of really cool things, everything from Super Bowl ads to digital experiences, you name it, amazing technology work, etc. So my responsibility within our team is I own and responsible the product owner for 30 websites globally. My responsibility is to make sure that everything from search engine optimization, our product roadmap, strategy, and our site performance, bottom line, is working every day. So I really enjoy doing that. You also find me on a mountain bike, as you can see. I do a lot in our community to help kids get on mountain bikes and get healthy. And so a lot of times that's building trails or doing fun stuff in our community, like fixing up bikes for kids at the holidays, which I love to do. So with that, I'm going to jump into our agenda for today. Again, stop me anytime if you have any questions. But this will be our agenda. We'll talk with web, with text, with SEO, and data and QA as well at the end. So very quickly, I want to talk about how important it is, right? You guys are in this room for a reason. You want to learn more about and expand your knowledge of digital marketing. Web is obviously a key part of that. And ultimately, that's the table stakes, right? The first brand experience that most people have is the website, with a particular company or product. And so if that's successful, is that excellent, or the terrible? And that can really turn people off either way. Or really engage them and make them become fans and make them become more of a loyalty buyer and shopper in the long term. So there's a lot that goes into that, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. So let's start first with brand image theory. So this is developed by Philip Kotler. This is his outline and theory of how, and I'm going to connect this to why it's important around websites. So if you think about all the different touch points of a brand, that's ultimately what a brand image is, right? It's all those unique experiences and different touch points around them. And that ultimately is what can drive loyalty. It can drive repeat purchase, excuse me. And it can really drive that behavior that you want of somebody being engaged with your brand and hopefully becoming that loyal fan. And so that's really why you often see web and brand working very closely together, because obviously that web is just one of many touch points that we experience overall. So I wanted to talk about that. Obviously, we'll, basic definition of web. Right? So, and it goes way deeper than this, but there's 4 key ingredients to web marketing that I kind of look at. First off, is the content. It's king, right? Is your content valuable? Is it helping me make a purchase decision? Is it giving me something, of value that I didn't have prior? Is it helping me understand your point of view? Is it helping me market my own skills or my own expertise internally at a company? Sometimes finding a solution to a problem, right? I can go into my company and say, you know what, I think we can solve this. We thought about this, or we thought about this software or this technology or this process or this company to help us with this. Oftentimes that's part, and sometimes can turn personal internal brands of the company. So that's why it's really important. Because otherwise it's just a bunch of PDF sheets, with data sheets stuck up on a website that really has no value. The people, I have had the opportunity and really the fortune to work with some amazingly talented people, and that's what drives this. It's their unique life experiences, their motivations, their skill sets, their knowledge, their passions that drive your website forward. And so having great people to make that happen is essential. The technical, right? So these are all the different facets. So running, secure, operating fast, right? Nobody wants to work or load a website that takes forever. You're onto something else. But it's always constantly evolving, and that's one of the things I love about the web in general, but also our sites that we take care of. And data, right? So how's that site performing? Is it meeting your expectations? Is it helping the business generate more sales, right? Ultimately, that's what it's supposed to be doing. It's connecting with buyers, helping them throughout their journey, and then ultimately at the bottom line, those business goals. So we'll talk about that. Very quickly, I just wanted to use this example from the Wayback Machine of some work I did long ago. So we're throwing it way back. But 2008, this was the first project I got a chance to work on out of college. It was a fairly big company at the time, and they were growing rapidly. They were on their way from, I think it was $500 million to $1 billion, that was their strategic goal. But they had a horrible website. It was Flash, it was Cold Fusion, it was like, I think it was run by some guy in his garage in the server, like it was just really outdated. But they needed and wanted to go through this process of evolving it. How do they get there? So that was my responsibility, but I had 90 days. I didn't have a lot of time. So between us and a digital agency that I was able to bring on, we went through the process. I'm going to show you what that process is like here in just a second. But keep in mind, over those about 6 or 7 years I was there, we went through multiple iterations, all kinds of acquisitions. So, they had one website when I started, and that was it. They had, a list of products. But by the time I left, they had a pool of an additional 30 websites that they had acquired from an acquisition. They had a pool of another, I think it was 15 sites, country sites, that we had expanded over time. So they had this massive implementation of software and content that we needed to manage. And that's ultimately what you see here in the 2014 was the announcement of an acquisition. So brand new logo, new brand standards, new identity, all of that all came to life across this massive platform. And that really was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun too. So just giving you guys some visibility to kind of how this works over time. So here's the process, right? So what did we go through during those massive implementations, both in the single site implementation as well as the later stage where that expanded out? You go through discovery, right? You start to think about the research of who are your buyer personas. You guys just mentioned buyer journeys and the concept mapping and all of that. In fact, we're actually doing that here. I'm offsite at a team meeting, and we're going to be doing some of that with our team later. So it's useful every single day. Discovery. What platform do you want to use? What code, right? Are we using .NET? Are we using Windows? Are we using Linux? Are we using a content management system? Well, who do we know? We have people certified in that product. We go through the purchase process. There's a lot that goes into that. Next up is architecture. And I want to stress architecture is something that's often not done enough, but it really sets the tone for everything to the right of that era. So with architecture, think about the information. How's it organized? How's the filing cabinet of those web pages that you need to have? And the cleaner it is, the better structured it is, not only will your search engines and your visitors find the information faster and better and rank you better, for example, in search, the other part is that it will actually make the rest of the right process faster because everything's defined. You know where it sits, you know how it is, you know what templates and components you can build your pages with. And we'll get into those details in a moment. But again, it's really an important part. Prototype. This is really the fun part. This is where things start to come to life using tools like Figma or Adobe XD, where you start to sketch and think about, well, okay, what do we want these pages to do? How do we want them to look? What information is organized in what structure? And priority, right? The most important things at the top, the more important things at the bottom. That's really where you start to see how the user flows work, right? Okay, if I go from this page, well, how do I get to that? Oh, I can't navigate to that because there's not a button to go to that other page. Okay, well, we need to add that. So it's really a fun process to shorten the design process, which is next. So next up is design. This is where you start to, the designers who are often amazingly talented have an opportunity to go in and put together the brand identity, the brand style guide, and apply that to the web. How do we want to see things visually? What colors, what shapes, what fonts, what feel overall do we want to convey to our visitors to the site? That's where design starts. And then once that's started, you often have the content area, and this is the area that is, I think, one of the most underrated areas of a site build. If you think about a site that might have 1,000 web pages, how much content that is, and you think about, okay, well, how do we know where that content's going to go? How is it going to flow into the new design? Do we need to rewrite some? Do we need to shorten? Do we need to change, right? Our messaging may have changed from 4 years ago when it was last written. So you go through that process of rewriting, adjusting, optimizing for search, right? That's really where all of that starts to happen in the content area. But the piece that I want to stress is that the writers, the editors, the authors around the content stage of things often have the biggest lift alongside between them and the development team, which is next. They have some of the biggest effort. So if you think about loading and, whether it's through automation or sometimes manually, fortunately, moving hundreds of pages from one platform or design to another, or sometimes even thousands, it's a massive undertaking. It's often understaffed or not given enough time at the time. So while all of that's happened, you have the development team, they're now engaged because they have the designs, they have the wireframes, they understand how things, the interactive elements, how things work, be structured. So they're the ones starting to make the site function, right? They're connecting the back end systems that will be used for authoring to the front end so that visually they can be managed. And they do this in these kind of little bites and pieces to make it function over time. We'll talk about that development process in just a minute. And then the other piece that's really important is the testing. So QA or quality assurance, as well as user acceptance testing, right? So making sure that everything is indeed what you expect it to do, it actually looks like and does on the site. That's one of the most important areas because that's your brand promise. If you go to a site and none of the links work and images are all wonky and it looks weird on mobile and you can't navigate it, the brand experience is awful. So spending time through the QA process, the testing process to make sure everything works properly and is buttoned up 100% is really, really important. I used the example of a project I worked on and it was really, I'm very proud of it, so I'll mention it. I had a pre-IPO project that I had to send across through, of course, our leadership over to the president of Dell, Michael Dell. And he had to review this pre-IPO site that we were building. And it was, I was a little nervous, right? I had to make sure spelling, grammar, visuals, everything was proper. Like it was 100% buttoned up. And so that comes back to the testing process because you don't know if he's looking with mobile, you don't know if he's looking with desktop, different screen sizes, etc. Everything had to be functional and make sure that everything was proper. So stress that QA process. It's a really, really important step. So, and then the launch. If you've ever been part of a website launch, it's really a lot of fun. You get everybody in a room or at least virtually through Zoom. And for multiple hours in a day, you're in a war room and you've got your architects, your technical people, your developers, your designers, your content authors. Everybody's there to make sure that once you push the button, site's live, everything is working properly. There's no issues, but everybody's there in case there is. We can handle different things. Okay, hey, there's an issue here. Okay, solve that. No problem. but that's really what's fun. And it's kind of it's a big team building experience that I really enjoy with the team. But this is reality. So most of the projects that I've worked on kind of have this pressed, almost slinky-like compression in spots where discovery takes forever. You can't get on executives' calendars. It's, everybody's got an opinion. It's the jockeying of who needs the most value, and where their product is on the homepage, et cetera. And then architecture gets squeezed, prototyping gets squeezed, design sort of gets squeezed, and then content is rushing. It's et cetera, et cetera. So one experience was in that IPO example, they came back and said, hey, we need you to cut 3 months out of your launch time because we need to go IPO on this date. Told us it was much longer. So what do, right? The slinky action starts to happen, and what ends up on the cutting room floor is a lot of functionality. So things like different page layouts. Well, okay, we're going to have to kind of reuse elements and kind of make this one sort of work, and we're going to kind of start to kind of do your best and make an MVP or a most viable product, right? That's oftentimes what happens, and that's okay. Just end up with a lot of stuff in the future that you can put back into future development site as budget. But I use that example because it's reality, unfortunately. You don't often control the dates, and you have to do your best to adjust to the business. All right, any questions before I jump into content? I see one in the back.
Yeah. Okay, so I have 2 questions. First is on the discovery phase. So I had a similar experience with my project during the summer. And so how do you manage that fact that a lot of people will have different opinions and would delay, elongate the discovery process unnecessarily? How do you manage those stakeholders? Because some of them are really important stakeholders that you need to listen to, and you need to talk to everyone so that people would have that sense of being carried along. So how do you manage that to reduce? Because it takes a lot of time. It happened to me, and it was pretty challenging. That's the first. Should I ask the both questions, or should I wait when you're done with this?
Let me answer that one first, and then we'll jump to the second. On that, in terms of discovery, how do you keep it from going this way? First off, expect it's going to go that way. So if you approach discovery, set your timelines accordingly and say, okay, we know that discovery is not going to be 60 days. It's going to be more like double that. So you have to adjust your overall timeline, add more padding in your overall structure to accommodate this. If you build too rigid timelines, you have no room for give. And ultimately, that puts the pressure on the rest of the team, like the dev team, the design team, and really, unfortunately, is a negative impact on their health and their well-being. So the more you set things up front and you set those expectations better up front, then things will be better for everybody throughout the process. But also something to consider is being clear on deadlines. If you tell an executive, we are cutting off on this date, all feedback is due by this date, pad it, because they're going to be late. If you say all feedback is due by this date, and you communicate to them, if they haven't received feedback, maybe a day or two before, give them an opportunity, oftentimes they go, oh my gosh, okay. Especially if you convey that if they don't give us the feedback in time, it's going to risk, right? It's going to potentially risk the delivery at the end, and they don't want that. So that's one suggestion.
Okay, thank you. So I have a question also on the content. So sometimes when you're doing like ABM, like account-based marketing, and then you need to, how do you target your content? How do you develop the content to? Because usually decision makers in B2B settings it's not usually one person, it's usually like a committee. So how do you design your content to cut across those different kind of personas that will be in the room when they're making decision for whether they should go for your product or not?
Sure. Yeah, I think we all recognize that buyers, especially for enterprise products, happen in a group, not in a single individual, right? Oftentimes you have different influencers, you have decision makers in those deals, right? And depending on where they are in that role, it's important to speak and address their specific their issues and priorities to solve their problems. So to your point, there are a couple of ways to go about that. You've seen where on certain sites, there's often either a role definition, maybe a selector, for example, on the site some way. Sometimes I've seen in SaaS where they'll have use cases, which often are persona-based use cases. So use cases can often say, well, okay, if you're a financial lead, CFO, or you're a solving problems for that financial area or marketing or sales or service. I think Zendesk, for example, is a great example. I believe it's been a while since their site. They used to have a pretty nice use cases problem. Too. That's another way where you can deliver content that isn't necessarily core to the product differentiation and solution, but it's unique to that specific persona. Now, the other part is that you can also solve that with a more advanced approach, which is personalization. So if you have an understanding, maybe it's data from either first or third party cookies, kind of going way out here, but you're going and you have data on that person. Maybe they have a login to your site. Now you know who they are. You know maybe what their LinkedIn profile might be. You might know roughly kind of what title they might have. You can dynamically swap out content through a personalization tool like Adobe Target or Optimizely or some others. So there are definitely more tools available now than there used to be, but it's all time-based.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah. Great.
How do you deal with shadow IT? Like when you are doing like building a new website or something like that, like how do you deal with that kind of risk?
Great question. And I've seen it before. I actually had an example where we came across a bunch of websites after an acquisition nobody knew about. They were, the bill was just being paid. So that's one example. But shadow IT and within marketing has to come from your leadership, and it has to come from the teams, and basically saying, this is not acceptable. So for example, and for those who are not familiar with shadow IT, that's often where a marketing team may go rogue and go, you know what, we just got to stand up a little microsite, little mini site here on the side. We're just going to build, take us an hour in WordPress or Wix or Squarespace or whatever. Just kind of stand it over here to the side. We'll have a domain configured, and you know, it might be brand such and such.com that the IT team may not know about. The issue and the risk, to your point, is back to the business. It's a massive security and financial risk to the business to do that. So it's important to look at the team, discuss those ethical discussions, those decisions within the team, and say, we don't support or approve this. No matter how hard it is, no matter what we need right now, let's not do it. If we need to do it, then let's open the discussion with our IT teams, our security teams, have those platform discussions with what can we do, what can't we do, and not go the road approach. But it really is, think about this. Oftentimes the security and the infrastructure is all protected on a corporate main website. But if you stand up something in WordPress, which by the way is like the Swiss cheese of security, think about it. If that site gets hacked, no one cared that it was like for an event or a little one-off campaign. They will say the overall brand has been hacked. And I can assure you that is not a discussion that you want to have. So that's my view on shadow IT.
Also a follow-up. So you went through a lot of mergers. How do you deal with the architecture of merging all the sites in one, or like how much that process takes, and what should be the realistic timeline? It should be 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, like what should be the timeline for that?
First off, good question. Yes, my former role, we did 25 acquisitions, and we'll say it was like 6 or 7 years. When it comes to acquisitions, oftentimes it's a very small team. Oftentimes acquisitions, especially in publicly traded companies, a small team is put under a non-disclosure agreement umbrella. And so it's a need to know basis. It's, you know, it's given a code name, it's given, you know, because if the information got out that you were acquiring that company, then obviously there's risk, you know, in the stock market, et cetera. So you have a very small team. Usually that team that's been, you know, under the umbrella, if you will, goes to and works with that new company who also has the same, you know, kind of equal counterparts, and you work together to sort out, to your point, how do you merge these properties together? In many instances of my experience, it was oftentimes looking at their products and saying, okay, you have a product strategy or a product lead from a leadership standpoint. Here's how it's going to fit into our portfolio. Here's how it's going to kind of work alongside us, or it's going to be an additive benefit to our existing products, right? Maybe it's sell a particular type of software, and this is an add-on, and maybe like maybe you sell CRM software, and now you have an HR component, right? And those two worlds through acquisition now work together. So the idea is figuring out the product roadmap. How does it work in your information architecture first? And then you figure out technically, well, where does it fit in the design? How does it go? How do you take that to market in your future iteration? So that's typically how you would handle an acquisition. And to your timeline question, oftentimes acquisitions in terms of the announcement and sometimes is a lot more aggressive than a year. Oftentimes those announcements can be weeks. I remember giving up my holidays, unfortunately, for a particular acquisition. Unfortunately, sometimes it's part of the job, not always, but you know, I got the time later as well. But just understand it can often be, you may be given weeks notice. You may be given a very short amount of time to do that. Now, long term, there's a different discussion. That may be where you go through a rebrand, right? As these two worlds collide and it becomes a bigger discussion, then you might go through an overall rebrand, as you saw earlier. Any other questions on that? Good things. I see one, two, couple more.
I have a question about the optimization stage, specifically for small businesses, because I know it's different for you on a larger scale where you get to work with a ton of teams that are probably measuring this data. But what are some good platforms you would recommend other than Google Analytics? I don't know if you even recommend Google Analytics, but for small businesses to be using to track this data on their own, where it may be just a 1 or 2 person team.
Sure. The first one that comes to mind is HubSpot. So HubSpot is a fantastic platform. It's everything. It's a content management system. It is also has things like identity resolution, so you know what companies are on your site because your sales team's going to go, well, hey, who's on our website today, right? And you get this chance to see kind of that element. I believe it has a bunch of other things. It's a huge platform. It's got e-commerce plugins. It's got all of that. And what's great about it is you don't need to be a developer to manage sites in HubSpot. You just kind of log in. It's what you see is what you get, right? Editor, you go in, modify content, drag images in. But from a data standpoint, it has all that stuff baked in for you. So they have their own analytics platform that you can use, or they have existing plugins for things like Google Analytics 4, which is the most modern version of Google Analytics. And yeah, Google Analytics is a great platform. Oftentimes, most people, when you combine Google Analytics with Google Tag Manager and being able to connect the dots on what data you want to capture, okay, did somebody click on this button that triggered a form? Okay, I can see how many people did that per page. There's a lot of great platforms like that. So HubSpot's just one of many, but it's one of the most well-known. And by the way, Scott Brinker is a great person to follow. He's kind of now become their visionary. It's kind of like a special role over at HubSpot. If you don't follow him on LinkedIn, I would recommend if you geek out on technology and marketing, he's a great person to follow.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
I don't know if this is too early because you might touch on this, but I know you talked about for like the development side. I think you mentioned you worked like with HTML and CSS for like that early development, but what are most people using like in the business setting today, like a Webflow or like what kind of programs are?
Yeah, good question. HTML, CSS, all of that is still there, right? You've got whatever latest version of CSS, but there's a lot more platforms now that are allowing you to do significantly more than you could ever do. So when you look at things, frameworks like Bootstrap, for example, right, where grids and buttons and things it's a framework. You've got elements already defined for you. You don't have to go recode how you want a column width to be, how you want things to be structured. It's all there to start with, and you can use those pieces and that's how you want. The other aspect is obviously JavaScript, right? The most common these days is React, right? That framework, again, components and pieces for you to pull from to already to work on it. So you don't have to start from scratch and develop old school if statements and all that. You've got those pieces to use. The thing that I would say is that that's typically for large projects, right? You've got complex builds, you've got large complex infrastructures to manage and how those get coded. But there's also a content management system or digital experience platform software application that's running all of this. That's really where, for large companies, that's really where things start to happen. And you have the code, you have your presentation layer, all of that is managed, but on the back end, that's where your authors and that's where your controls are for folks, who want to go in and, for example, just make simple edits to the homepage. It becomes a bit more complex in large organizations. And I love that you mentioned Webflow. So fantastic, fantastic platform. Webflow is like the opposite. Webflow starts with the user experience and the design side, and is more of a visual, view of that content and that structure. So that's really where your designers, your information architects, and those folks kind of lead. And then secondarily, if you have unique pieces, that's really where your developers and other folks, front-end dev or back-end dev if needed, come in and add that in. But Webflow is something I would really, for a lot of businesses who are not massive, you don't have tons of sites to manage, you have this massive infrastructure to manage, is really a pretty product. Question. Anything else? Cool.
Okay, I think we're good to go.
All right, I'm going to drill through content, and we're going to get to a couple other things that we're going to go through. So very quickly, content, right, content is king. You'll hear this over and over. And there's a couple of pieces to this, is that by working on content, it builds your awareness. It's going to create that human view of your product. Nobody wants to be sold to. We buy from people, right? And that's where that trust aspect and awareness start to come together. So oftentimes, I know we've all seen it, right? It's the marketing cliche bingo, lots of words, lots of complex things that nobody's going to spend time to read. They're going to skim your headlines, and if it's not simple and easily understood, they're moving on to something else. Nobody has time for that. So move on, make it simple, make it easy, conversational is really important. And then demand, right? So for those who don't know, your buyers are already on your site. You may not even realize it, right? Your future buyers are already there checking out your content, looking at what you offer, how they found you through search. They may have come in through a paid ad. But you're especially for large, complex organizations, that sales process has already happened. They're at like 90% by the time they even raise their hand and say, I want to talk to a sales rep. So your website better be clear, concise, and be able to convey your value points and help them align with your proposition in that deal later on. So that's a really important piece. Very quickly, the stakeholders. This is really the fun part of when you get into web. All of these different marketing teams, sales teams, service teams, legal, risk, PR, all of these different groups need a voice on the platform, right? If you're doing, whether it's investors, whether it's PR, whether it's people who are trying to generate, growth marketers, for example, are focused on generating demand. You've got your creators. I want to launch a new podcast series. Where does that go on the site? And then, you often have other folks who are doing user testing, research, and data and analytics, and all of these come together, and each has really valuable points of view that need to be taken into account. So that's where this team or this approach comes to be a special target. And it's really a lot of fun. And yeah, it can be challenging. You always have differences of opinion, but it's how you resolve those differences and how you bring data to discuss, how to approach the problem. That's really ultimately where it comes from. I want to talk real briefly about the Power and Website Continuum. This is something where you may see in some businesses where things are locally controlled. You might have, for example, franchises, maybe a Subway franchise, and they might manage their website, or you might have on the other end, Subway corporate is going to manage the corporate side and infrastructure. But maybe you have local promotions. Maybe you've got local content that you want to offer to your market. Maybe it's lunch specials related to something in your market or something specific to your country or specific region. The classic is for example, I remember having to do an email. What was I saying? Oh, I'm sorry. It was a postcard, like a holiday greeting card. We went around the world. Well, how many people in Australia get the Santa Claus? I think we did on a moped, but you have to do, it's not cold, right? It's summer. So thinking about those regional uniquenesses and what's important. And this is where oftentimes how a website is structured, how the leaders play out is really important because it drives the changes in your architecture structure. I'm going to skip that slide. We'll come back to that later. Yeah.
So is website, like standing up an website, is an CapEx investment or a OpEx investment?
Great question. Oftentimes, different companies have different levels of what a CapEx investment can be, right? So minimums to be considered that. Ideally, companies will look at it as a CapEx investment because typically life of a website is around, from inception to redo is around 4 years, 4 to 5 years typically, which is ages, by the way. So good companies will look at it and say, can we expense this as a capital improvement over time and spread the cost? But your optimization, your daily investments, your team that's running the site on a daily basis is always operating expense.
Other questions? Okay.
Cool. I didn't think I was going to get finance questions. I love it. All right, let's talk very briefly about this because this is the heart of it, where things happen. So if you think about from the bottom up, we're going to start with infrastructure, right? This is where your server, your hosting, your how the content essentially is stored, right? The security of your domain, which impacts brand, right? You want to think about your brand from domain perspective. Nothing worse than somebody squatting on a domain of your brand, right? And the process to get those back is difficult. But that's the bedrock that has to be there in place to serve your site. And then beyond that is security, right? So thinking about how things are protected, right? Your client data, your personal information of your clients is the most critical thing that you're going to have. Nobody wants to go through and announce a breach, right? Equifax and many other companies fortunately had to announce those over the time. This is really where it's a critical piece of having those teams involved from the beginning to make sure that they understand how to protect your client data. It's really important. The blue line or horizontal bar is really where a lot of the action occurs. This is where your application management, like content management systems, for example, Adobe or Sitecore or whatever you might be running on Webflow, for example. This is where teams have to manage that, right? There's updates, upgrades, things that happen to software over time. Those have to be carefully managed and controlled. There's often systems like translation management, where you might be translated to English, but then it's going to go out to, for example, Japan, and that team will translate it, send it back, and then update their site. So there's a lot of different pieces to that. DevOps, this is where the development operations team occurs. We'll talk about that in just a second. But this is really where change occurs. This is where their process, how they approach it, is carefully controlled. And then QA and BA, which is quality assurance and business analysts, are often the ones who are helping facilitate the process for new development. They're the ones who help test, authenticate, and then in some cases, our business analysts will often help with user story creation. So how should it work? How should it operate? Helping to define those specifics, which is great. That gray bar across the middle, that's really where the front end starts to come into play. This is where your authors, whether geographically, decentralized or central, this is where your authors will go and update content. This is where designers and the user experience team will be involved in how that experience evolves over time. It can be testing, it can be research, all of those different pieces, not just design. But then also you have your data, right? This is where a lot of your data warehousing and other things of your analytics, right? Again, on a big scale. Or in many cases, it could just be, Google Analytics or HubSpot's data. SEO, of course, right? We'll talk about that. And then, of course, your product owners and executive leaders. And all these teams work together to make this happen. So having great networks, having great people, and great collaboration in the process is really essential for us. So, any questions on this slide? Because I know it's a lot of information to throw at you. Oh, I see one.
Yeah, what's the best way to make, when you're working in a team, obviously this is a lot of people on one project. How do you ensure that there's consistency in your design? Is that about establishing that at the very beginning? Or what?
Yeah, actually, we're going to talk about in the next section, we're going to talk about the user experience and the consistency of things like a design system, because that's ultimately where your consistency comes from. So keep in mind too that, for example, and maybe I also want to share this, is that in a website platform where there might be, let's say, 30 local websites, the templates, the page layouts, the images, the content, a lot of that is templated. So it's not like 30 independent websites. It can be if it's you know, it needs to be more of that autonomous structure versus central. But the teams are using a lot of the same design elements because they're already baked into the page layouts that are provided to those authors and those local market owners. There's also the componentry of, well, what buttons do I use where, and how do all these elements work? That's where a UX design system.
I guess like also like who's overseeing that, like those last touches to ensure like that it's uniform over the whole thing? Because obviously like designers know that like there's a common goal, but who's like overseeing that, or how do you collaborate like to make sure?
Yeah. So the owner ultimately is your platform owner. And then you also have your leads within each of your different disciplines. And it doesn't mean that there's a reporting relationship. For example, the platform owner doesn't necessarily have the UX team reporting, right? Or the web authoring team. That can be, it can be more of a flat org. But the ownership often comes with your creative director or your creative lead for that. And they'll often oversee the designer's work and say, okay, yep, that meets our standards. And so often it's the creative director that has that final say, along with the platform owner, to say, yep, that's consistent with our brand, right? You got your brand details in there as well, right? So we're not using purple buttons when we should have green buttons, for example. You know, or they should have rounded edges versus square edges, right? All of those little minor details that you know, are part of the overall brand experience. But to answer your question on who owns it, ultimately it has to do with the creative team, and the author who's building that content, and the platform or product owner.
Thanks. Any other questions? All right, Ryan, we got about 30 minutes left.
All right, so right on time. Let's talk about web dev process. We'll talk about this very briefly, but the idea is that little parts and components that need to be created in the development of a site have to go through a specific process. Anyone here ever used or heard of Agile or Scrum frameworks? Ever actually used them? See, yeah, a couple of hints. Okay, so development teams typically work in a very rigid process because it yields the best and most efficient way to deliver elements of performance that then get released onto the site. So it's a wonderful way to know what goes in and how it comes out and how it's tested. And when it's released, the idea is low risk and accurate to the original functional description and definition. So that's ultimately how this process works. And so this is where your designers, this is where your front-end developers, this is where your back-end developers, your architects, QA teams, they all come together in this dev process. And so every 2 to 3 weeks, depending on how frequently the team wants to release code, they'll go through this sprint process to identify what's in the next sprint. Okay, we're going to look at it. Okay, we understand what that is. How we're going to solve it, and then how we're going to release it, and we go through the process of making it, and then out the other end it comes as a new feature or function for the website. So that's that. Very quickly, DevOps roles. This is kind of how it works. These are some of the most important roles in the operation. There are many others, but this is some of the 4 I wanted to highlight. Front-end developer, this is where your design team is working most closely with the front-end developer. They kind of take the Figma mock-ups and visuals and make them real. They turn them into web pages. And that's really where having a great collaboration, you mentioned that earlier, that's where that magic happens. Understanding how buttons, how interactive elements work is where the designer and the developer, front-end developer, work together to make that happen. And in terms of frameworks, yes, there's tons of different JavaScript frameworks. There's tons of layout and structural frameworks within CSS like Bootstrap and many, many others. So keep that in mind. Your back-end developer, this is often where these developers are best often around certain products, right? They might be an expert in Adobe Experience Manager, that platform. They might be an expert in Cypher, and understand how to pull the different, these non-technical terms, move the levers and make it happen. But they help wire all those pieces together to make the site work on the back end so that when authors want to add new content, they want to build different pages in different ways, those backend developers enable that process. So it tends to be much more technical. So they work more closely with the infrastructure team and the web application team. Those are the groups that they typically work with. Architects are a little bit more visionary. They know all the ins and outs of like what's possible. Can we wire it this way? Can we do it that way? And they help often uncover ways to solve problems in a much faster way than having to go back and start with the heavy lift of development. So very quickly, CMS, DXP, and DAM. Encourage you guys to get to know more about some of the names in the slide, whether it's Adobe or some of these. If you're interested in going into large companies and working in web, you'll hear these names a lot. These are kind of the incumbent companies that Gartner and others have said, hey, this is what buyers are using at major companies. So good to know. And as more and more features and functions are enabled in these tools over time, the personalization used to never be, you used to have to buy a separate piece of software. Okay, gonna bolt this on, gonna add that. Okay, we want customer profile management or data. We want to bolt that on. Now, a lot of these platforms have expanded to have these features already baked in to make things a lot easier to do. So, and then lastly, in web, we have headless CMS is a really neat technology. Encourage you guys to look at it if it's something you're interested in, where think about creating content once and then replicating it through an API out to multiple different destinations. Maybe you've got a billboard in Times Square. Maybe you've got a video wall in your executive leadership center. Maybe you've got a taxi cab that's running in New York City, right? And you want to digitally display that. Those types of CMS platforms you create content once and you can repurpose and reuse it and send it to different places without replication. And it often can speed the process. We mentioned Webflow earlier. Highly recommend you guys check that out. Really, really cool platform. I think they have a free trial. We'll play around with it. So, UX, very quickly. Okay, so let's talk about the user experience honeycomb from Peter Caldwell. This is a framework that I think is really valuable. As you're looking at your websites and you're thinking about, well, how do we improve it? What elements or things should we consider to change or evolve or work on enhancing? And these 7 facets that Peter Caldwell defined, ultimately, I think are a great way to look at it. So, right, is it usable? Is it useful? Does the site serve a purpose? Does it not? Are the visual aesthetics important? Everybody wants a cool looking site, but if it's, for example, not findable, well, then that's pretty useless. They can't find it. Is it accessible? We'll talk about that. So, and credibility is really important on trust. So, elements of UX. So these 4 areas are something that are important for the user experience. The design system, and I'll show an example on the next slide of what that looks like. But think about this as the elements and components that can be used. If you're building a piece of software, why would the button in that software for a company look different than the buttons on their website? Why would that look different from their intranet buttons? Well, just as an example, it's much more complex than that. But the idea is that now, with a design system, you can reuse elements and drag and drop instead of coding it every time or styling it every time. You can just go and grab that component, say, you know what, I want that button, I want here, and boom, that's it. It's that simple. So it speeds the time and also increases that consistency as well. User research. I love user research. I think it is one of the best and most underutilized areas. It's fairly inexpensive to do. There's like UserZoom and a bunch of user testing platforms, which just some others, where you can put your current website in front of a bunch of users that you trying to find their criteria, and you will come back with some shockingly humbling results. Like, oh, I had no idea they were stuck on that. Oh, somebody's rage clicking on that button. They can't use it because in a mobile device, for some reason, it doesn't render well. So definitely a great part of it. And usability testing is kind of part of that user research discussion as well. And then accessibility. So I can't stress accessibility enough. I have a great case on this discussion at Sidebar, but suffice to say that it's important to design a site that everyone, regardless of disability, can access, utilize, and enable. Because in many markets like Canada, there are legal ramifications if you don't. If you don't meet certain standards, they can fine and things like that. So, but it's the best to approach. So and get the content that you serve. So think about UX design system. So this is just an example from IBM's Carbon system. Many companies have this. Encourage you to go Google it, go check it out. It's a really interesting approach if that's something that is useful in your plan that you want to take a look at. But again, really valuable and great for consistency. So in the meantime, we're going to jump over to Google's design sprint process. So very quickly, this is going to lead into an exercise. So take a look at how this works. So the idea is to understand the problem, define that problem, think about the users, think about the outcomes, and the different design elements that you want to solve. Once you define that, then you move into this really fun sketch round. And we're going to do a crazy 8s exercise. For those who've not done that before, we'll walk you through what that looks like. But it's a really fun kind of time-bound 8 minutes, 8 different designs approach to solving a problem. And I'm going to define that for you guys, and you guys will get a chance to do that on those whiteboards that you have next to you. What I love about this is that when you go through those designs and you sketch really quickly, and then you have that discussion, which we won't have the time to do everybody today, but we'll hopefully do 1 or 2. It's that really insightful discussion of why did you approach that one? And you start to think, oh, you know what? Wow, they really had something of value here. I want to understand that better. And that ultimately gets into a prototype, and then ultimately gets put in front of users through that user testing process. So it's a really cool way to try to solve issues in a like a 2-week time. So with that, if you guys want to grab your whiteboards. And I had a joke about a shark, so everybody gets a shark. Okay, so you guys see those blue lines on the screen? Kind of a horizontal bar about halfway up the horizontally, and then 3 vertical lines roughly spaced apart. Doesn't have to be exact, roughly spaced apart. You guys can go ahead and draw those on your whiteboards right now. That'd be great. The sketchy drawings in between, yours won't look like that. So just draw the blue lines for me. But ultimately, in the end, yours kind of starts to look like this.
So just draw the blue lines that are up there, 1 across and then 3 kind of even on the blue.
Yeah. All right, everybody good with that?
Yep.
Oh, cool. All right, so let's go on to the challenge. So what I'm going to do is I'll read through the challenge, I'll explain it, I'll ask any questions, and then we'll start an 8-minute counter, and you guys will get a chance to sketch your crazy 8s. So first off, we have the scenario is you've got a B2B company, they're a software company, and they have 4 categories of products that serve different buyer needs. Each category happens to have 5 products within, just for simplicity. What we're seeing in the data is that visitors are bouncing around the site trying to find what they need, and they're often leaving too soon. So the bounce rate's too high, time on site's really low, they're just getting frustrated. So we want to solve and fix that. And how do we do that? The company's looking for fresh ideas to welcome visitors to its new website that is going through a rebuild process. And it wants to guide the visitor to the best software product that's going to align to their business need. And all ideas are welcome. So no idea is a bad idea. Just the idea is to free flow sketch and think about different ways of websites that you liked that you thought were a great way to navigate and maybe helped you buy a particular product that you're maybe not as familiar with. The idea is to sketch up to 8 different designs, maybe for like a homepage product selector, like how do I, what are the different options, or a top navigation, right? It can be a simple nav, it can be a complex nav, both mobile or desktop, whatever you feel like designing for each of your different spaces. And again, line drawing, sketch, this is not final art, and that's the approach. Any questions before?
All right, so everybody
clear on the exercise? Yeah.
You're sketching out some ideas for how this company could lay out their website. They have 4 main categories and 5 products per category. The problem that they're facing is that people are not visiting the website very long. They're going on there, they're clicking around. We anticipate it's because they're not finding what they're looking for. So how are we going to solve this problem? And we're brainstorming layouts to solve it. Make sense? Questions? All right, so Ryan's gonna put 8 minutes on the clock, and then we'll take some volunteers to see how you approached it. Okay?
And
All right,
3,
go.
2, 1, go.
I'm having trouble accessing like. Like, I played on the phone, do like.
It takes a bit server.
And for me, like when I do it, all I have to do is scroll and it's there, like.
That's what it's supposed to look like.
Yeah.
That's good.
Your work's done it.
I don't know.
Are you not using your?
Y'all logging out and logging back in.
Yes, I log in on.
Like foster in Nashville and then these people.
Look like I was.
Go ahead and do the exercise.
You guys.
Let me just test it, see what it does, 'cause you can submit it multiple times.
Yeah, and keep in mind too, you can use a mobile view. That's helpful. You want to use a desktop view or tablet view. And oftentimes those experiences can be different. Might be in a mobile, you might need certain information sooner versus maybe a desktop. So think about that too.
Makes sense. By somebody looking at
My first.
They only make sense in my head.
I'm gonna get it for mine.
Also, there's yours. The first one is mine, the other two. All right, hold
How are we doing, Dr. Riley? We looking to see some designs.
We working on it.
I got two literally quality. That's all I got. Throw my shit. I'm gonna have four.
If it's also, if it's helpful, think about the personas and how they buy, right? How would a persona be organized on the site? You can also think about that sometimes too.
Myself.
So this is.
Thank you. Alright, what we got? Idea for what?
Top 4, then it drops down. And it goes at 5.
Got it. Walk me through.
Which
I don't
one?
know. Any of them.
Alright, so for the first one, top 4 are right here.
Okay.
This is like the layout. Nice like picture of what the brand is offering here when you first opened it. Then you
Okay.
pick your selection and kind of like drop down. It's a whole new interface after. They'll have their own.
I think I understand.
What do you mean? It's like on the landing. On the landing page, there's 4 corners. And you can options. It's like either you pick one of the 4 corners to go to the next information.
That's the shape. I'm about the top bar,
Yeah, where it
the
is.
bottom.
Because I think about it.
I'm like, it works. I don't even know what I'm doing. What are some other shapes? I'm running out of shapes. I did a star. I did a star, a circle, a square, a rectangle, and a heart.
First page is set, but after that you can scroll.
What happens if we have a different screen?
If they wanna.
My monitor is 32 inches big. Your monitor is 24.
Big. That's my daily about.
It's adjusted for size.
Okay, I need two more.
Alright.
I need
Very
two more shapes.
Collaborative effort.
I need two
No, it
more
was just
shapes.
my fault, it was the same thing.
I could do like circles and have like.
This one is set up, drop down, but.
Okay. Yes, bigger shapes.
Yeah, no, they're fine.
I did bigger shapes and I put it inside the bigger shape. Thanks. Hey guys, my idea, make shapes and they have drop down menus. They don't like me. See you later. Yeah. Sharing is sharing. Good.
All right, we got our 2-minute warning.
Okay, got 2 minutes left.
Anybody get all 8 yet?
Yeah. You decided to do a certain.
Part of the question is, I figure, you know, we have the technology.
I mean, hey, take advantage.
It's like fabulous. I copied them. Why now? How did it start?
Digital white. She way less than did, yeah, all.
Such a good song, you guys.
Different shape.
Yeah, exactly.
Laptop.
Yeah. I don't know.
You think I am creative?
I don't know.
There's not really much. This is-
Yeah.
Are you hiding?
Their parents and stole their money. It's like, yeah.
I don't know. There's something that my kid just said. She said she's.
I know, they're really working, damn, okay.
Like an everyday.
Like, she wants.
The ugly one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that one. I don't know what's happening.
The apps.
Is it?
Drawing boxes of cards, I guess.
I know you're right. I know. I just get bored. I'm like,
Final
maybe I
10
should
seconds
put
and
together
then
a post.
we're done. Just,
It's so.
all right, everybody, time is up.
That would be not feeling to the.
God.
They took some other ones that weren't the best.
You're doing so good.
All right, Dr. Riley, you ready?
Both. What would you say that is?
They're suing. I'm like, I didn't.
Ours is not sexy, it's Capital One.
All right, Dr. Riley, who do we have that's gonna come up?
All right, what we got?
I was willing to pay a lot.
You wanna send yours?
She's super excited.
Super excited.
No, she ate up. No, somebody else.
Meals?
Oh, yeah. So I've got 8 here.
Up here.
Oh, yeah.
So your peers can really see it.
The
Yeah.
one thing to know about me is back in elementary school, I was considered to be the worst handwriter ever. So I apologize for that. And I think it's still true now. But one of the things I was thinking about is kind of doing these almost like mind maps. So kind of like the 4 categories, having there be kind of like lines or drawings kind of outside of them, kind of draw images in, and in one where all 4 of them were kind of clustered together at the top. But I feel like that one was the worst because they were also close together. And really kind of, like, useful to
Show Ryan.
Oh, sorry.
We can see. That's camera right there.
Nice.
There we go.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Um,
Thank you, by the way.
yeah, a little bit of it's like ranking the products are like this to least popular. One where it's like the top two products are top and top two during the bottom. I did one where it's AI. What are you looking for? You can use search menu. One kind of additional drop down menu. So it's like you see all four of the products.
That's excellent. So lots of different ways to approach the problem.
You don't have to go through all of them.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, by the way. And thanks.
I love
Thank
the
you guys
fact that you were so thorough.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you for going through that.
so I know you had some more slides, but I want to make sure we open it up to ask any
Yep.
questions about career, trajectory, changing it up. He went back for his master's at one point in time, so you'll see the slides once he sends them. I'll upload them in Brightspace. The SEO and data are the rest of the slides, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So
Yeah, I
you can
apologize. Didn't get through it all.
those things. So we'll open it up for questions. If we don't have any questions, do we have any questions? Any questions? Anthony?
Yeah, so thank you so much for class. So what I want to know is what industry trends have you observed in B2B marketing, web marketing right now that is, where is the industry shifting to in terms of trends that you've seen?
Question.
Sure. Anthony, so what I'm seeing is that what you expect on a consumer website like e-commerce, those expectations, because at the end we are all people, those same expectations those buyer expectations are expected in B2B. So modern, simple, clear, direct user experience is the same thing that you would expect in from B2C is being applied, and a lot of pressure is being applied to B2B to get our act together, right? We should be speaking and approaching things from a design perspective and experience perspective the same way that really great leading B2C companies approach their sites. And that's really where you see quite a gap today in terms of the trends.
What are some of the most successful CTAs that you've implemented on websites specifically for service companies?
So for a service company, is that you're talking about like a software as a service or something like a HVAC type service company? What's the difference?
Either, I was thinking in terms of like the real estate industry, if that helps, but
Real
like,
estate?
yeah.
I personally don't have experience in the real estate industry, so I'll be candid about that.
Either, which one kind of falls within experience you've had possibly?
For me, it's been software as a service. So being able to get, whether it's a freemium trial, getting people into that process. We did a lot of work on user research and A/B testing, which I didn't get to. Unfortunately, it's in our data section. Get to read about that. But of tweaking forms, what fields, what is somebody willing to accept before they bail, and how do you sort of improve that flow and that process? And often it's a very iterative testing process, and that's ultimately what I would suggest. Anytime you're starting to play around with CTAs, think about it in a very careful way. Set up your tests, A/B, right? Your default versus your variant, and sometimes multiple variants if you have enough traffic to benefit from it. And approach it in a way and go through those testing scenarios. There's some great information in the resources slide from a company called CXL. And they do some really interesting tutorials on things like A/B testing and multivariate. That I would encourage. Anytime you're playing with CTAs, what you don't want to do is think, oh, this is how it goes, I'm just going to change it, and then all of a sudden your form fills just fall off a cliff. So approach it carefully.
It's CXL?
Yes, yes, Charlie Extra.
Okay, cool, thank you. Answer your question. And when he sends the deck, there is a slide for resources that you can look into as well. Kevin?
What's something you wish you knew or were told when starting out your career?
That's a good question. I feel like if I had more knowledge of business competition and cases was one. I wish I'd known that was even a thing. wish I had been involved in and been able to grow in some of those areas. I also feel like soft skills is one of, at least for me, is an area where there's so much development on upward communication, managing up, right? I don't know that there's a class in it, but man, if you don't manage up well, I can assure you it doesn't go well. I learned that really well in my career. So great communication, managing up with leaders, and also being an owner. That was something that for me, own what you do. There's a slide later on data, and one of the things I have there is to know your numbers. If you happen to be in the elevator, or in a call with in the leadership, like CEO or whoever, and they ask you, "Hey, how's the website doing?" "Wow, did you know we're 26% on this and that?" And they're going to be, "Oh, here's somebody who owns their part of the business and takes it seriously, and I can trust what they're going to give me." That's hopefully a valuable, regardless of what those numbers are, what it is. Know your numbers and know where your ownership of your area of business.
Yep. And there is a case. I'm going to send it out via email because I forgot to put the flyer in the slides. There is a case opportunity November 1st. The deadline to sign up is the 25th. Suzanne said she already sent y'all information about it. Y'all seen that? Maybe it's no. Oh, good. You'll get it from me. If you sign up and participate, then you'll get extra credit. So just FYI, that's coming. And you had a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you had any like website or like newsletter recommendations for kind of just keeping up with like the industry, because it seems like it's always like changing and
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I mentioned Scott Brinkert is great with the HubSpot in his book Hacking Marketing, as there are tons of great business books. I found his really helpful. I also included some links to a guy named Andrei Zinkovich, who runs, he's a co-owner, co-CEO, I think, of a company called fullfunnel.io. He is one of the most prolific LinkedIn content generators I've ever seen. Really great sketches, really insightful information around managing things like ABM, things like the entire demand funnel, great POV. Highly recommend that. Again, I have his information linked in the resources area, but great question. There are tons of, sometimes it's finding a technology that you like. Go see who the CEO is. Go see who the owner is. Especially with a lot of the modern SaaS companies and things. That's where I find a lot of great information, because oftentimes your SaaS providers live and die by things, in very small numbers. Like recurring revenue is super important. Whereas, companies who have long sales cycles, they don't have to optimize as fast or as at the same level. Whereas if somebody's on a site for a SaaS product, man, you better capture that person. You better figure out how to get them involved in a premium product, or be able so you can market to them and continue to turn them into a loyal buyer. So just different worlds that we see at SaaS versus your longer sales cycles.
Cool. You got a question?
Yeah, it's really quick. It's just, what other websites do you recommend for beginners to use and to start on? I know you talked a little bit about Webflow, but I know there's also like WordPress and Wix. Is there a certain one that you like the most or had the easiest experience on?
I love Squarespace. I created long ago, for a nonprofit I was involved in, the website was terrible. I didn't want to bother with hosting. They were on WordPress. I think for beginners, something like Squarespace, go start a free trial, or what. I think you can create a free website. You just can't assign a domain to it. Try it out. Screw it up. Like it doesn't matter. It's just, the more you learn about how it works and the plumbing and like where pages are, data, it has an analytics platform already baked into it. So I love Squarespace for a lot of those simplicity reasons. It's also great for a variety of themes and layouts. Just pick a different theme. Okay, just push a button and poof, it's a completely different layout and structure. You can go in and change it and play around with it. So I really recommend something. Wix is probably, I believe, the same, but I just have more experience.
Cool. All right. Let's thank Brian for his time.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate being here. Great to meet all of you and hear your aspirations. Wish you all the best in your future aspirations. Reach out if you have any questions and we'll learn more about the club.
So his LinkedIn is in Brightspace. If you go to week 2 and scroll, you can see it'll say guest speaker Ryan Kramer. Click on that and then scroll down and you'll see 2 questions. That is literally the survey. So thank you to Ryan for his time. Please make sure you complete that and the assignments for the weekend, and I'll see y'all on Monday.
Bye, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Riley.
Thank you. If you want to email me the slides, that's cool.
Will do.
Thank you.
See you, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, so, hi guys, my name is Anthony. Sorry, there's an event going on right now in 1 Village.